Then down.
Should we start?
Yeah, we're gonna end at 9:45, 9:50.
Okay. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the first of a series of 3 informational sessions about the stormwater utility discussions. With me today is my colleague, Councilor Earls, and our Department of Public Works Director, Brutus Cantareggi, Robert Cantareggi, everybody knows him as Brutus. Kate Schoberg, she is our GIS map expert. And our consultant, Jean Haggerty, is here to answer your questions as well. So today we expect to have a casual, courteous conversation about what this means to us as a community. And, right? What we're going to do a little bit of background, and then we'll talk about the financial problems that we face. So I would like to thank. We also have Ben here. Officer Ben is here over. So if anybody needs to pat him like I do all the time, to calm down, he always comes up and gives me a kiss. So that's nice.
Aww.
See, look. He is here with us today. So thank you for that. So with that, I will send it over to Brutus to start the discussion.
Thank you. Once again, Bruce Cantareggi, Public Works Director, Town of Franklin, Kate Schoberg, and then Jean Haggard. She's with Wood Environmental and Engineering firm that we've used for quite some time. So I'm going to go through the some information on stormwater. I think, if people have been around here as long as I have, we've been working on the subject for a long time. I mean, our first grant that I got for a stormwater utility was actually back in 2006. We looked at one from a coastal zone utility, a coastal zone grant. But anyways, a lot of stuff I might go through. People might already know about. Maybe they don't know about it. But I'd ask if anybody has any questions, just let me know. I think it's just appropriate to stop as we go along to answer them then instead of waiting till the end.
Okay. All right. So if anybody has a question out there, just raise your hand and we'll stop and let you come up to the microphone.
And I think it's also important to note, this is, as you touched on, this is the first one we're doing, and I think you had talked about trying to get a good time for everybody to attend, so obviously 8 o'clock on Friday morning doesn't work for everybody.
Right.
But we'll be doing another one on March 11th, and that's be done at Franklin TV, and that'll be from 6 o'clock to 8 o'clock at night, give or take. And additionally, we're going to do one on the 25th. That's a Saturday morning.
21st.
21st, I'm sorry.
It's okay.
But I think that should be able to give a good focus when people can show up at different times. So we try to get the information out. And I think I know you and I have talked, Counselor. That's all just about getting this information out and getting some feedback. So that's what we're trying to do.
Okay, hold on. We have a question.
TV on the 6th, 21st, where?
Franklin Library from 11 to 1.
Franklin TV is the 11th.
Thank you.
Yep.
Right, from 6 to 8. March 21st is Saturday at the library. Okay. But there was also one other thing I wanted to add, that after we're done with this session today, we will have a Facebook Live event on the Franklin, the Town of Franklin Facebook page. So if you have questions, you want to let us know right away, you can always just log in then, and we'll try to answer as many questions as we can between 10 and 10:30. But we really want your questions, because I feel like we can adapt and change this program for people so that we make sure that we answer everyone's questions. Okay? All right, now I'm going to give it back to you.
Get the information out about the information.
Okay, right.
So a little discussion history. Once again, as we touched upon, we're just trying to create more people about the stormwater issue in town, as has been identified in the state and federally. And this is basically, we call it an MS4 permit, municipal stormwater separation permit. And this is, as we like, it's always brought up, it's an unfunded mandate. This is a permit that's come down from the federal government through the state to the town, and there's no funding behind it. They're telling us what to do, and we have to figure out how to do it. And their idea is that's our job. They just want us to clean the river up. We've been very proactive in the town. There's a stormwater website that you can go. It gives you a whole bunch of background information on this presentation I've done in the past, history of the MS4 permit. Discussed a proposed framework for creation of enterprise fund utility. I think, as obviously we know, the town council did establish utility in January of this year, but with that, there's no fee attached to it. So the framework is in place, but I think we need to come up with the best way to fund this, how we're going to do it, and that's part of the discussion. And then, as a result of that, the ad hoc committee, this is part of it, town council evaluate the financial structure and assist in educating the public on stormwater. And on the committee is obviously Councilor Hammond, who's the chair. We have Councilor Earls. We also have Councilor Delaco and Councilor Jones on the committee. So one of the things that I've always brought up, and whether we're talking stormwater, wastewater, drinking water, I think it's very unique here in Franklin. And what we've done is we've always tried to work all these three together. So anytime we're doing a drinking water project, we want to make sure we bring in a stormwater aspect and a wastewater project. We do this for a number of reasons. Obviously, I think most folks know that we are a groundwater community. So I've always said the stance that any rain that falls on Franklin, I want to stay in Franklin. I want to reuse it. I don't want it to go down to Mine Brook. I don't want it to go down Charles River, and I don't want it to go into Boston Harbor. I'd rather it stay here so we can reuse it. So one of those things we have to do is we have to treat the stormwater. Same thing with our wastewater pipes, our sewer pipes. We've done a lot of work on those, and that's basically to tighten them up, because a sewer pipe that has gaps or leaks in it actually acts as a drain pipe. So that will get rid of our groundwater, and that ends up in the Mine Brook, and that ends up in the Charles River. So we want to go ahead and keep it in Franklin. We've been very successful over the years. I can document that we use we've reduced our average daily consumption of drinking water, close to 1 million gallons a day. And we've also documented over 600,000 gallons of water not going into the sewer pipe, which goes to Charles River Pollution Control District, which ultimately we have to treat. So these are all good things that work together. Now, stormwater is the new one that's part of it. So what is stormwater? Stormwater is water originating from precipitation events like rain, snow, and ice melt. And it's basically what happens is the rain or snow, whatever melts, it catches, it could be natural occurring stuff like we talk about as phosphorus, or it collects other stuff like oils, particularly what the easiest one for folks to think of is for cars on impervious area. They're constantly dripping. They're constantly leaving, whether it's antifreezes, fuel, stuff like that. They leave it on the ground. It's picked up by the water. It basically gets attached to a piece of soil, and then gets washed down the drain. And then how we treat it, how we get rid of it. Stormwater in Franklin, I kind of touched on this before, groundwater recharge. This is really important for us to remember, drinking water. And then the next thing with this permit really goes into, particularly the last part of the permit, the last 10 years, protection of the Charles River Basin. Franklin's unique from other communities that are not on the Charles River. We have to come up with a phosphorus plan, a phosphorus loading plan. We have to reduce a certain amount of phosphorus that goes into Charles River. And the reason for that is excess phosphorus in the Charles River can potentially cause algae blooms and kill fish. So EPA, under the Clean Waters Act of 1973, has deemed that this is part of that whole permit. They've moved that forward to come along. So that's where we get tied up in. And that's for every community along the Charles River.
Okay, so that's actually an added thing.
Correct.
On top of the MS4, that we because we're on the Charles River, we have to clean up the phosphorus as well.
Yes, because
Okay. I just wanted people to realize because of where we are, we have extra regulations on us.
correct. So there's an established TMDL, which is total those max daily allowance of phosphorus for the Charles River. A lot of rivers don't have that. So if you're in the Ponset River, they don't have that. So if you're in Norwood, this is not an issue. If you're in Springfield, they don't have it on Connecticut River. But because all the communities starting from Milford all the way down to Boston, the Needhams, the Millises, everything along there, they all have to deal with this issue. And it's part that really kicks in year 10 of this permit, but you have to do a lot of planning before that, and you have to start doing things. But it's also the most expensive part of this permit, too.
Okay.
Very, very expensive part of this permit.
Through the chair, if I might, this actually seems like a great opportunity to chime in and ask kind of why. Is there unusual levels of phosphorus loading in the Charles River? Do we need to go slap the wrists of some of those fancy golf courses up in Wellesley and demand that they clean themselves up? No, I'm kidding slightly.
Yes.
But why are we targeted here in the Charles River watershed as opposed to the Neponset River or any of these other smaller watersheds for this extra phosphorus component?
So, a couple of things. This is obviously just my opinion. I can't speak for EPA. But the Charles River has a very strong advocacy group called Charles River Watershed Association. They've been sampling through volunteers for the year. When I say years, 20 to 30 years on the Charles, actually 40 years on the Charles. And, it started out when they cleaned up the Charles River. I mean, if you go back to the 70s, the dirty water and everything else like that, it was a mess. People didn't want to live along the river. It stunk. There was raw feces out there. There was industrial discharges. Those have all been cleaned up for the most part. So now what's happening is this is the next permit that's come along, and this is another thing they identified. There have been algae blooms in the Charles River. There have been some couple of what the people call fish kills. I don't think there's been one recently. Do you know?
5 years?
Yeah, about 5 years ago was the last one. And the thing and I say this is me personally, it's unique about it, is the cost associated with it. I think it's very expensive, and you have to have the right conditions. It's not just like you put too much phosphorus in there. It has to be the warmer temperatures, has to be very low flow river. There's a lot of other issues that goes on, impoundment areas behind dams, stuff like that. So it's a very expensive thing, but that's what's on the permit now. So that's what we have to go after, and we have to establish TMDL. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
So the other thing we obviously have to look at, like bacteria control, that's, everybody pretty much gets that. And that's basically if there's an illicit discharge, it's like a lot of stormwater, someone might tie a sewer pipe into that, or they might tie an industrial goes into stormwater. So instead of getting treated at like the sewer plant, it actually just goes right into the river. But one way they can check that is we have to do, and that's what we're doing this year.
Okay.
We have to do a lot of dry weather testing. Basically, we go out if it hasn't rained in a couple of days, and we start looking at all our outfalls. Well, if we see liquid coming out of there, like, it hasn't rained in a while, so where's this coming from?
Right.
So then you might do a bacteria test on it. Well, you also do some other tests too, but to find out where this comes from, then you have to find out like where it's coming from, and then have to come up with a plan to get rid of it and dealing with the property owner or whatever. There could be a myriad of reasons why. So everybody has to deal with that. And as you can imagine, that's what Boston and Cambridge and the big cities have been dealing with the first part of this permit, which came in back in the turn of the century, because they actually had their stormwater pipes and their sewer pipes were all tied together. So when there was big flood events, the sewer would go over to the stormwater, so that was called combined. And that's when the harbors, you remember, after big rain events, would just, you couldn't go near it because it was just all the raw sewage came out. So, but they've made Cambridge, Boston, all the big cities, even us, we run that. We didn't have a lot of those in town because our sewer system is relatively new. But yeah, you had to separate them all. So that's already been done. Okay. And then the total suspended solids runoff, that's pretty much what I was talking about before. Stuff that falls on impervious area gets attached to colloid sand, and then they end up, not treated oil, stuff like that goes down into the river. The other thing we talk about bacteria, I think is important because Ben's here. We've got to tie him in here. Animal waste is a big problem right after rain events, and it's not just dogs. It would be raccoon poopies. If it doesn't rain for a while and we get this big rainstorm, all that stuff will go down into the swimming areas and stuff like that. We do test that, but it does take a while, so people should be aware of that.
Well, is that what happens at Beaver Pond?
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So I will say, we only test there weekly during the summer months. So if there's a rain, and it takes a couple of days to get it back. So my advice, just generally speaking, if it hasn't rained in like a week,
Yeah,
and then it rains, I'd probably take a day or two off before I go swimming down Beaver Pond.
Okay.
Because by the time we catch up, not that people get sick, but you just never know.
safer that way.
Exactly. But we follow all the standards on that.
Tips from Brutus.
Yeah. So we talked about the MS4 system,
Right.
town. And I think I've touched on a little of the stuff already, but it goes back to 1973 Clean Waters Act. Other thing we've done to clean up, obviously, Title V in Massachusetts. We have all the old cesspools are now replaced by Title V safe ways to go. 1990s, I talked about the MS4 medium and large cities. That was the separation of the two. MS4 small communities. Boston Harbor cleanup. So Franklin's considered small MS4, and there are 6,695 small MS4 communities across the U.S. That is definitely a Gene statistic, because I did not know that.
That is actually a Kate statistic.
Oh, that's a Kate. I'm gonna give Kate the Great the love on that one, okay? And now
So there's like there's 6,700 small communities across the U.S. that have to do this.
yes.
Okay. So we're not alone.
No.
No.
It's not, nobody's picking on us,
No.
right? I mean, we need to know that. I think.
And there's over 200 in Massachusetts. I mean, there's
Yeah.
over 340 communities, but there's 200 in Massachusetts. And the criteria, they have a separate stormwater system, population less than 100,000, and located within a Census Bureau designated urbanized area. So smaller communities can get wrapped up into this. They got bigger communities around them. So even though if it's a standalone, what's the one in New Hampshire doesn't have it?
Doesn't have it?
The city, it's a big, Concord, was it? Didn't follow. It was weird.
Has one, I don't know.
There's a larger city that community a population like over 30,000, because it was so spread out, it did not meet the criteria.
So it's a density thing as well.
Density.
Yes.
Okay.
Well, here's your map, and it shows you which areas are covered. And obviously, you can look around. You can see pretty much where all the larger cities are.
Mm-hmm.
I will tell you, I was out at a conference a number of years ago, and I was talking to the woman that she ran for LA County. We were talking about MS4 and compliance, and I was just going off about, oh my God, they're going to cost the town of Franklin $60 million over the next 20 years. And she looks at me, she goes, we have a $1.2 billion consent order, from the EPA that they have to do in LA County. Because you think the size of LA County is bigger than New England, but they were just dumping all, Manhattan Beach, they were just dumping all the raw sewage right out in there too, like we were doing in Boston Harbor.
Wow.
But $1.2 billion.
Wow.
I'm like, yeah, you win. They got a lot of fancy posters out there to educate people.
Yeah.
So, but this shows you it's all over the country. So what have we done already for the MS4 stormwater in Franklin? So a lot of this started way back, and I don't want to get too much into it, is they were going to propose an RDA, a residual designated authority. This is going to be like a really, really special little permit that they were going to give it to private properties in Franklin, Bellingham, and Milford. This is a national thing. For whatever reason, they chose those three communities. And they looked at it, and they came in here. And us as the three communities, we really pushed back hard on it. And we were able to, besides doing public outreach, testifying, meeting with EPA, we got grants, we went back, and we basically pushed on it really, really hard. So a lot of things that came out of that, actually, of that RDA, helped us with this permit now.
Okay.
And the first one we did was the phosphorus fertilizer ban. You get Brutus's bill. It was just because of my education in agriculture, and as Mel, I think you know too, that in Massachusetts, phosphorus is so abundant in our soils, it's really not needed as a fertilizer. So in the fertilizers at the time, like this picture, this bag shows that they always use as a carrying agent, just to fill the fertilizer bag, because it's so cheap. It's just out there. So we looked at it, and we said, okay, why don't we just get rid of all fertilizer and turf grasses for the fertilizer, so phosphorus isn't allowed unless you get a soil sample, or something like that. So if you really have a phosphorus problem or starter type fertilizer, you really need phosphorus, you can get the phosphorus. But it basically just got rid of all the phosphorus. And the nice thing about that is when EPA looked at that, they gave all communities in Massachusetts, those 200 communities, they basically give you a credit system. So we were credited 10%. So if we had to get rid of 50 before, we're now going to get rid of 40%. So they gave us rid of 10%. So that worked out to millions and millions and millions of dollars a state. And that was basically just a policy change that they, and when you were saying earlier Amy, about the golf courses, it just gets rid of something that's really not needed.
Right.
So that,
It's
that
like
really helped.
It's like an extra load in the soil that then it just gets rinsed out, washed out into the water.
Correct.
Right. So
It's kind of like we'll talk about later. Like the next biggest problem is for phosphorus. We could say the easiest thing to go after is leaves, because
Right.
the leaves are full of phosphorus because they just pull them up from the soil.
right.
So that's just this.
Can I ask you one
yeah.
question? So you talked about credit,
Yep.
right? So because you wrote this bill, because we banned the phosphorus, they gave us a credit, but that means we have to reduce the amount of phosphorus less than we would normally have had to.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yes. Which
Okay.
ultimately saved us money.
Right.
And this whole thing was just more. It saves us. In Franklin, is estimated to save us over $5 million.
Okay. That's great.
Just implementation costs, because we didn't have to get rid of the phosphorus another way, by
Right.
building something or doing something like that.
Okay.
So the other thing is Franklin, we've been on various levels. We've gotten I'm sorry.
Just through the chair, if I might, just wanted to jump in briefly, Brutus. So this is, I think, maybe an interesting opportunity to kind of just talk a little bit more about the question of phosphorus. It sounds like from the way you're describing this permit and the RDAs that were proposed for the Franklin-Milford area, the big problem here is that there's no baseline of how much phosphorus should be in the river, unlike something like an Antarctic ice core that you can pull out and say, how much, carbon dioxide was in this air bubble from 3 million years ago or something like that. The river is continuously flowing. The stuff goes out into the sea all the time. So we don't really have a good, safe, allowable, what's the normal amount of phosphorus in the river supposed to be. So this is fantasy, basically, of bureaucrats and activists imposing some kind of limit here. Essentially imagined from the Canadian Experimental Lakes Project, which is what, Canada's great contribution to science in the 70s. They couldn't fund a moon project, so they bought a bunch of lakes in Western Ontario, dumped them full of phosphorus and nitrogen, and studied the effect of eutrophication, which is essentially nutrient pollution, when you have algal blooms that can starve the oxygen and kill fish in water, which is sort of the basis, I gather, of a lot of the current day concerns about phosphorus nitrogen pollution, which is sort of what we're facing here in Franklin. But it seems like a challenging issue because, as you've just sort of touched on, we have substantial background levels of phosphorus just because of our local geology here, plus the fact that we're the most substantially reforested region in the entire world, so we're chock full of deciduous trees, dumping leaves all over the place that naturally, with the breakdown of their leaves, produce phosphorus. So, this is a case we're being hit with charges for things that are largely a natural condition here in Franklin. We're not doing heavy agricultural stuff here. And I'd just be curious to explore a little bit more of how this local ban on phosphorus fertilizers, was implemented and how it's enforced.
So I want to start with saying I completely agree with you on so many points about. So our baseline, which is a big thing, is the TMDL helicopter was established. Was it 204 or 20? It's not the Watertown Dam. They took the samples so what we're based upon, and everybody else in the river, was something that was done in 2000. I think it was 2004.
4 and 5.
Yeah, at the Watertown Dam. They've yet to go back. Even to go back, and I have asked that a million times. I've asked for local things. I try getting grants to test the Mine Brook to see, because we did all these stuff down the Spruce Pond watershed, like around the Parmenter School. We put all this. So I actually wanted to see, is this stuff really working? No. They don't want to retest because I think they're afraid to reopen up what would happen. So, yes, you're right. It's very complex. And everything you talk about, tree regrowth, everything is so true. So we fight the baseline all the time, but there's no way that they're going to reopen that test up because they were able to get this permit through based upon that. And once again, because it's a Charles River, that's the one. So we talked about earlier, like the Neponset, like anytime they talk about doing that, everybody pushes back because the worst thing I can tell all my peers is anytime anybody wants to do a TMDL, fight it. because once you have that TMDL, it's established, and they have to go off it, and that's what these permits are based off of. So when you talk about the fertilizer, how that's enforced, it's banned at the state level. So all these companies, the agricultural companies, they just stop producing fertilizer with phosphorus in it. So, but you could go to Home Depot or Agway, and if there's a bag of fertilizer there, you could call up and the state and say, hey, why are they selling fertilizer? It's not supposed to. So that's all enforced at the state level. We don't do any of that. But it's more, I can tell you, going through the process of this, there was a lot of pushback, obviously, from fertilizer companies during the time doing this, because now they have to make a different product for Massachusetts than they're making for New Hampshire or Vermont, which probably isn't a big deal for us, but if you live in Lowell, it's right next door. I mean, that's, the shipping type thing. So they did push back a lot on that, but now it's, and I've personally I go by Home Depot and I look, and they're all, 24 or 28, 40, most of them that are all out there, so.
Even though this is probably a pretty, to quote, de minimis, to quote our former town administrator's favorite word, a pretty de minimis source of phosphorus, manure, I'm gathering, is still allowed, right?
Yes.
Yeah, which is a major source of phosphorus in and of itself, and a natural source, along with basically any kind of animal excreta is great for phosphorus, which is what farmers have traditionally used before we had the Haber-Bosch process to make modern-day fertilizers and stuff like that. So I'm sure some people do still go ahead and use things like that, or you could purchase that out of state, right? You could go purchase phosphorus-based fertilizers up in New Hampshire or something like that and bring them back here for your farm or for your home garden, correct?
You could, and I think it's just more, I think most consumers are just, it's a convenience factor of it. If you think about the majority of fertilizer bought in Massachusetts, like you said, we're not a big agrarian anymore, is that they buy step one, they buy step two, because that's what Arnold Palmer says. This one's supposed to put in my lawn. So if that bag says phosphorus in it, they're going to buy it. If it says no phosphorus, they're going to buy it, because that's just what they are. There is a thing in there that if you are, a farmer, or you really need it, you can do a soil test, and that's the whole thing. We do a soil test, and say your lawn does come up phosphorus, you can take that and buy a bag of phosphorus fertilizer. Mm-hmm. But I think what they identified, particularly at the state and EPA, we hope to believe that farmers kind of know what they're doing, but it's the people. Franklin's, on the other hand, is a perfect example. We're very suburban, rural type. We have big lawns. We have the half-acre standard colonial lots that they come out and they just throw a bag of fertilizer down, and then it gets the runoff because it goes down there. It's not treated. So I think that is a larger problem, and where most of us are, we're located. Those type of areas are located by, like I say, the Mine Brook. They flow into there because they actually have a conveyance system now, stormwater system, because the planning board makes them put in all these catch basins and all this stuff, so that actually catches that fertilizers and stuff. So. Yeah, it's just more of just, you say about educating the public, but it's more like if you just take it away. If they can't buy it, they're not going to buy it. So.
And through the chair, if I might, just one quick follow-up question. Here in Franklin, what role do septic tanks have? Given that that's, human excreta, just like the animal kind is a source of phosphorus. What do leach fields and things like that? How do leach fields and things like that play into this, given that we have a larger proportion of our population that needs septic tanks, particularly in South Franklin, relative to, say, a Newton, which has probably 0 people on septic tanks?
What I can tell you is, and I'm not an expert on Title V, but I can tell you when it comes to like phosphorus, the byproduct that we're going after, the best filter in the world is, it works very, very well with getting phosphorus out. So that's when we have these, the huge stormwater retention bays or whatever. They usually tend to capture it. That phosphorus becomes fixed in the soil. So I would imagine, like I said, that it goes out into a septic leach field. It's going out. There's a breakdown, obviously, and then the effluent goes out, and then that's picked up by the soils. It doesn't go down into the rivers and the drinking water. I don't know our statistic, but we're almost 70-something% sewer in this town, and then. Even the Title V, it's been around. Title V has been around for so long that most of the cesspools, I think, are gone. So most of them have to meet the Title V. So I think that shouldn't be a big problem. I love the leaves things, though. I was down at the EPA and I said, "What do you want us to do? Rake the Franklin State Forest?" I mean, that's their mentality, and they look at you like that could work. That would give us credit. I mean, that makes sense. Rake the forest, but that gets rid of leaves, right?
Give them ideas.
I know.
I'm sure the citizens would love it if we chopped down all the trees in town. I think
Yes.
that would go over very, very well here in Franklin, judging by past tree removals.
Yeah, they call me about that too, the tree warden. The bad news. Anything else?
That's it. Thank you.
Okay. So the other things we've done in Franklin, I think we passed the local bylaws, and that's usually for the construction or reconstruction. I'm a big believer. EPA, when it went back to the RDA and even the MS4 permit, they want you to do stuff now. And I'm a big believer in you get them when they do the redevelopment. As a business comes in, if we always talk about the big Y across the street. They ran all their numbers. They knew what it was. They knew the type of system they have to put in, whether it's for stormwater or air conditioning. I don't know. But they run the numbers, know if it's going to work or not. But to make someone like Stop and Shop, who's been around from the 80s, say, hey, you got to dig up your whole parking lot, spend $1 million because of this new permit, I don't think is right. So that's why I think our bylaw is really good in Franklin. We get them during redevelopment. That's when we do it. It's nothing to push them to go do it right now the way EPA wants it. I think a lot of folks know that, since I've been here, we've been doing the road narrowing sidewalk removal program. If the roads are really the best one I can think of recently is obviously Skyline Drive. That was 36 feet wide. We reduced took 10 feet off and got a sidewalk out. Besides reduce our impervious area, we were able to, do stuff to stormwater, but also saves money. That's the other thing. Money I saved up on Skyline, I got to reconstruct another road. So that's I just think good business practices. Invest in award-winning programs. My town engineer will say sometimes, I said every road improvement project needs to have a stormwater aspect of it. So it's either we do our Franklin tree wells, or we put some rain gardens in. Kate does a lot of rain garden work in town. So we try to do that and get it out there. And we got credit. I'll talk about before, but that was one of the big things when we sued the EPA, so we want to make sure we got credit for all the stuff we've been doing for the last 15 years. The other good thing is do a lot of public outreach and education. I think, it's a great one to highlight would be the sculpture park, where we went over there, and that started out as a 319 project, treating all the water coming off the condos off the hill before it went to the brook over there, and then we went ahead and made a nice park out of it that the folks use. And so I think that's, and I think you go out there, you see the stuff we talk about stormwater, why it's important. I think, and the ones that we do it to schools, I think are very, very important. Educate the youths. We've worked with other towns. Obviously, I talked about working with Bellingham, Milford. We've done stuff with Medway, just on working on different things together. We've worked with environmental groups. There's a lot of different ways you can say that. As a military guy, I can say, keep your friends closer, your enemies closer. But on the other hand, a lot of times they have good ideas, and we can look at them, and if they're feasible, we have done them. But it's also we do a lot of things with them, and we're recognized as being one of the better communities to be in a green, environmentally friendly community. So when like I was saying, you, Amy, like sometimes they come up like clean up the river. I'm like, you people are out of your minds. We kind of, because of the costs associated with it, we get a lot more credibility because of that, because we are doing the right thing for the right cost and the right thing, not just, pie in the sky type of stuff. I've testified a lot at public events. We've appealed this, and we sued the federal government. I mean, I don't know what else we can possibly do as a community, at this size. Where other people have taken the back seat, Franklin, we've been out there pushing back hard.
Could we take some questions?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Come on up.
Yep. Paul Shelley, 6 Pearly Lane. Very, very impressed with some of the things they've done, especially the last one about suing the EPA. I think that probably is the highest priority. Questions that I have, probably for Brutus, is the building regulations. Have they been changed to reflect this? For instance, is the planning board now not going to stress 30-foot roads and 2 sidewalks? Because if we're not going after the existing building regulations, if you build a subdivision in town, first off, they're going to ask you for 2 sidewalks and a 30-foot roadway, if not even bigger. So I think we would be remiss if we haven't changed our subdivision regulations. And I know on commercial that's easy to do, like Big Y across the street. But that's one thing. And all downspouts on all houses should go into dry wells. So those are easy fixes that take care of a lot of things. The other thing is the whole MS4 map that you put up appears to be really focused on the northeast of the United States. Of course, Arizona's not going to be there because there's very little water out there. But it seems like it's really predicated against one corner of the country with a lot of water, a lot of rainfall. So that's one thing that's a little disturbing. The aspect of leaf removal, hopefully you're going to cover that in greater depth, because I think that's a huge factor that doesn't make any sense. If we're going to pick up leaves, that's going to be hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of new equipment to be able to do that. And the other thing is the Charles River Watershed Association. Now, I was on a water and sewer task force, I believe, in 1997 and 1998. And I guess that died the manila fold of death, but we addressed all of those issues. If somebody could pull that report, because we had several counselors, myself, and a bunch of citizens. But quite frankly, our interactions with the Charles River Watershed Association back then was terrible. They're environmental Nazis. They attack a town like us, and then the multi-millions of dollars for their improvements, which are based on, as Councilor Eamon said, very weak science. So I hope that our approach with them is not a working approach, but one of we will litigate if we have to. And I guess if you could answer some of those questions, I know it's a lot.
Yeah,
We have them written down, so
Was
we'll-
so the first one, you're talking about the bylaws in town.
Yeah.
So a lot of the regulations that came, especially for control of water on site of commercial, that was a lot of language that the town already had in place that was even ahead of what DEP and EPA wanted. And that was because we did that as a groundwater recharge, because we talk about drinking water, tying that stuff in. So when you think of like with the Big Y, that has been in place, is very good, and we meet all the regulations now. As far as the zoning and the bylaws and the subdivision build-out plans, that can always be a tricky subject, because as you're right, the regulations do say you have to a certain road and everything like this. I do know, and on the Franklin Planning Board, that yes, the subdivision rules require, for example, 2 sidewalks. But what they typically do is they mitigate with the developer. They usually, I can tell you all the ones that have been built lately, they only have 1 sidewalk, and the roads are either 24, 26 feet wide, and then they make them put in granite curbing, the upright granite curbing.
Slope granite curbing.
Well, no, actually, the ones we're doing now, they're actually straight granite, because we find it to be much better. So that's part of their process, what they do. So as far as the impervious area goes, you're very correct with the downspouts. A lot of communities are doing that now. They make them put the
But I don't think that's in the existing building regulations.
no.
So that's a huge thing if you're going to build a house.
You got 2 things going on. You got building regulations, and you got planning rules, subdivision regulations, were totally different. I can tell you that some communities, their subdivision rules and regulations, they require downspouts into dry wells. The problem that you usually typically have with that is the maintenance of them over time, because if not cleaned out, then they fail, and so that's always an issue with bonding.
Okay.
is that where the rain barrels come in?
They're very easy to maintain. That's one of the reasons. Thank you for bringing up that great rain barrel program that Kate's in charge of. We sold a lot of rain barrels.
We're currently in the middle of a program right now
Okay.
through May,
All
so
right.
if you want a rain barrel.
Okay, Paul.
Okay, yeah.
What was the next?
The question on the downspouts then, if a homeowner has already put in downspouts, is that calculated into the new regulation so that it reduces the square footage of the roof on the home?
So what we have right now, we did a GIS. We plotted we'll talk about it a little later, but like the size, how much impervious area it has.
Right.
So part of what this is like after the fact, you come out and say you have like 5, what do you call me, building units. And you can say, hey, my whole roof is put into a downspout. Then you get credit for that. So
Okay.
basically, it would be taken off. We haven't done that yet because we don't know, but that's part of the system. I know a lot of people talk about, and this is all the financial stuff. Is this a tax? But technically, it's a fee. If it's a tax, there's no abatement program, but there is a fee, so there is a credit system. Whether you put downspouts in, whether you do there's a lot of different things that you can do.
My last item is, it seems like the Charles River Watershed Association is really focusing on Franklin. It's based on my past experience because of our sewer plant that we have in Medway, the Charles River Pollution Control District, right? So basically, we're being penalized because we did something right in the 60s. People forget about the sewer beds that we had on Pond Street, which were, despicable, full of bacteria, overflows. So it seems like the question now is, Brutus, I think you can answer this, the outflow of our plant in Medway is cleaner than what's upstream, if I believe, because I used to fish the Charles all the time. That plant cleaned up the Charles. It didn't do what people are accusing it of, because the outflow is cleaner than what's upstream of it.
So, yes, I can tell you, well, first, the plant, it gets its own MS4 permit. So they have to meet all these regulations, what you're talking about. And to your point, yes, I've brought up numerous times that the water coming out of the plant is cleaner than the water in Charles River. I've also brought up to them, like, you know what, this is like since I've been here in 15 years, we've reduced, because they always say the groundwater affects the Charles River, right? We show them, we've taken 1 million gallons less a day out of the ground. We're sending over 600,000 less water.
And
I
that's
tell
been-
them has the river gotten any better? Trust me, 2 million gallons a day, we're in Franklin, has the river gotten any better?
Now, I can
They
remember
can't.
when I was on the council in the early 2000s, we invested a heck of a lot of money, millions, into I&I. And I think you guys have infiltration and inflow, we identified as being a real bad cause. That costs a lot of money, so I'd imagine that's been an impact on it as well.
Oops, sorry. It has, and we have done a lot of I&I work, and that's where we can show that we reduce, 600 to 1 million gallons a day going out to the system.
Right.
And that's, like I said, it's a balancing act between drinking water and trying to keep the water, in Franklin. But the other aspect of that is, yes, it's expensive, but we're also sending less sewer to the plant
Right.
that we share, so our costs have actually
Goes down.
So
Very good, thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Very short comment.
Sure. Come on up.
Alan Earls, 23 Marvin Avenue. I just wanted to pick up on a comment former Councilor Chelly made, which might seem very inflammatory, calling the Charles River Watershed Association Nazis. My personal experience with them is with regard to the Charles River Meadowland project that I've been working on for several years. And we got on a phone call with them a few years back about our hopes to make this area more accessible, to better managed, et cetera. And the president at the time said, "We don't want you anywhere near that river, essentially. That's our river. You get out of there. We're not going to support you. Stop what you're doing. We don't want anything." And I said, "Well, we got a state grant to help." I said, "Oh, we'd like to be part of that project." So they have their own interests, and I don't think they're objective stewards of the common good. I think they have developed their own bureaucratic approach to things. I just wanted to share that. We'll come back with other questions.
Okay.
Can I speak, Molly?
Yes, hold on. Jamie?
Thank you, Councilor Hammond. Just really quickly, the good news is the former executive director, Bob Zimmerman, has retired. Yes. Ms. Norton has taken that over, so maybe there will be a different tone from the CRWA. We also have to look at the big picture with CRWA. It's an organization I've worked with my whole career. In the larger picture, if in the one hand, I think that a lot of the comments that are brought forth by them, that perception is accurate. On the flip side, their advocacy has also cleaned up the Charles River throughout, where if it wasn't for CRWA, you'd probably still see a river filled with what Brutus would call poopies. And we all know the infamous 1990s when Governor Weld took a jump into the river. And we all are familiar with, for those of you that have lived this long, go back to the 60s, 70s, the famous song. We know what happened in Boston Harbor. We know where all the sewage was going. We know that the MWRA is also a big part of this conversation as well, basically a quasi-state agency. To Councilor Earls' point, Newton, Cambridge, those cities are almost all on MWRA. There's probably no septic units there at all, or very few. So on the one hand, I think there's a wide spectrum here with CRWA and those activists, where on the one hand, I think there is a lot of success that we can point to. And on the flip side, I don't think it's any secret that they do have an agenda and that we can disagree with that agenda. And all of this feedback and commentary on CRWA is actually an excellent transition to Brutus's next slide, which is, and Mr. Chelly brought this up as well in terms of litigation. This is a question that both of these counselors, as well as all 9 counselors, have asked us, was to put forth a little bit more information on the lawsuit that the town of Franklin was the lead plaintiff on with CRWA, but along with the Home Builders Association of Massachusetts. And Bruce is going to go through this now, but normally those organizations are fairly adversarial in nature between the developers of Massachusetts and realtors, as well as the environmental activists. Here's actually an instance where we all got together and sued Goliath at the EPA all in one. So maybe with that transition, we'll turn it back over to Brutus to talk about the lawsuit.
Thank you, Jamie. So Franklin, we sued EPA, and we were part of a larger group. And so the city of Lowell, they sued, and they actually sued on behalf of the MS4 permit for their sewer treatment plant because of the requirements put on that. Franklin went after it because of the phosphorus loading and the cost was going to associate it. Conservation Law and the Charles River Watershed, they sued EPA because they didn't think the permit was strict enough. And then the Home Builders Association in Massachusetts, and it should be on it nationally, nationally, because going to Mr. Celli's point, the MS4 permit is very population density in the Northeast is, they look at Region 1. If these permits come out in Region 1, they pass here, the next thing they know, they're going to go to St. Louis. The next thing, because this, so EPA is kind of known as being, for lack of a better term, a little more, they try things here first in the Northeast. And if it passes here, then they try to move the permanent. So that's why the National Home and Builders Association, they saw regulations say it was on downspouts on every house. They know what that's going to cost for every house, for every condo building. They don't want to do that, so that's why they push back. So all these groups did sue. Yes.
We have a question in the back.
How many sued? You say some sued.
Could you come up to the microphone so people that are watching can hear you?
Rick Saccone, Chestnut Street. You say some sued. Can you give us an idea how many people are involved in this?
This is it. So as far as Franklin went, we originally, we got together with other communities and we all put $5,000 in. And I think there was, I hate to give the exact number, but it was over like 22, 23 communities. I can get you that whole list.
And have others entered into it as this has progressed along
No,
with us?
because when they finally we got to the point where we had to sue, they needed a community that actually was getting the MS permit to take the lead on it. So Franklin was chosen because of everything we've done. So, and at that point, another organizational group that the lot of municipalities followed, they started picking up the bill tab because the tab originally was supposed to be $150,000. It ended up being close to $400,000.
And the other group is?
The Coalition for, what the heck's their name? You know what I'm talking about.
No, but I can't remember the.
I can't remember
They're picking up the tab?
they did initially, but then they ran out of money because it cost so much money to sue
So the
EPA.
EPA's got you on, we're gonna run you all out of money and then you'll all fall
And
in
then
line.
they supplied the lawyers for us. But at this point, went to mitigation.
So we have the,
So we have answers to these.
Yeah. So anyways, we were successful in achieving. So obviously, the first thing we delayed this permit. It was supposed to come out a couple years ago and was pushed back through the mitigation of it. We were able to renegotiate the timeline for the phosphorus reduction plan. And that's really a big deal because the permits, we got to start planning for it now, but we actually have to start doing action type stuff, whatever we decide to do. And that's in year 10 through year 20. That's how it was spelled out. So in Franklin's case, it's estimated we have to spend around $60 million, give or take, which I can tell you that Gene and I think that's a low number. I mean, because that doesn't take into land acquisitions, easements, if we have to build stuff. Every time you build stuff, it costs a lot of money. So unlike the phosphorus fertilizer ban, or even picking up leaves, as much as that seems like it's a lot of money, it costs a whole lot more to build a big forebay. So anyways, so what we're able to do, we negotiated with EPA, is if we can come up with a plan, because under the Clean Water Act, the key term that they put in the Clean Water Act is when they could require communities to do things, is the word reasonable. That's in the Clean Water Act, actions that are reasonable. Now, you could put 15 lawyers in a room, and I can tell you, everybody's a different idea of reasonable, Okay, town of Franklin has a different idea of reasonable, same thing as Medway does, and same thing as conservation law does. So, but they all went along with that and said, okay, what's reasonable? So what we can do, it's basically like an off-ramp. We can go, okay, these are the funds we have available. This is the time limit we like to do it. So instead of being done in 10 years, maybe it takes us 25 years, and there's benchmarks that put in there. And this is something that, a plan that EPA would have to approve of, if we're going to go forward with that. We felt this is a huge victory for the communities to do that. I can tell you that Conservation Law and Charles River Watershed Association, they pushed back really hard on that because they obviously they don't want to wait 20 years, they want it done in 10 years.
Right.
So that was really the biggest one. The other big thing for Franklin was to get our credit for all the work we've done, because the other permit was in 208 was going to expire, the first one. So this is the first MS4 small was a 5-year permit, then in 208. We've been just operating on that for the last over 10 years.
Okay.
So with the implementation of the new permit, we want to make sure we got credit for all these things that we've been doing in the past. So we were able to get credit for that. So like our phosphorus reduction, whatever it's supposed to be, we get credit for stuff we did back in 2010, road narrowings, stuff like that. So that was a big win for the town of Franklin. And then all these outcomes save tax, but are just total life of the permit. Because I think you get the big picture stuff is that time is money. So every time you got one side that wants this done yesterday, it costs a lot of money, and that's the problem if you don't implement it. If you do get a consent order,
So
they'll come after you.
if we don't actually do anything, then we get fined,
Yeah, I got a slide in here.
right?
Yeah, it's coming up.
So, if we pay for these things slowly over time,
Yep.
then we won't get a big fine.
Yes.
Okay.
Let me just keep going through these.
Yeah, go ahead.
Because we'd have some slides on the costs associated. So what are the problems in Franklin? Obviously, we have an aging stormwater system. Basically, it's all put in, and it's estimated worth $175 million. And you got to kind of think about it as your car. If you buy a car and you buy it new and you don't do anything to it, it's going to fail. You got to do some maintenance on it. So that's
Right.
the kind of idea behind this. You got to maintain it. Say a car could be your house. It is what it is. We got basic maintenance needs, water quality impacts. We increase our best management practice. That's the way we do things. Obviously, there's areas in town that flood occasionally. That we have the biggest one I think everybody knows right now is the one over on Dean Ave. Where they're putting in those big apartments. That was one thing identified where we're doing that road. We're going to hopefully fix all that over there.
Right.
But there's other areas in towns that flood occasionally. MS4 requirements, what we're doing right now, mapping, condition assessment of the storm drain system, that's ongoing. Increasing cost to deal with this permit, it's basically we need more people and more equipment that was brought up. And we have a backlog of, capital improvements. A lot of things subdivisions you see around town, they're all overgrown. They haven't been maintained. We've tried to get some of them, but we just don't have the funding or people to take care of those.
Is this the culverts along the side of the road you're talking about, or what do you mean?
No,
What do you mean it's overgrown? That's, I guess,
so
the
when they
clarification.
build a new subdivision, like if you just want to think of you going up Lincoln Street right now, they put that little subdivision on the side of the hill. If you look out in the front, there's this big stormwater type thing, retention pond.
Right.
The water coming off the hill's all collected there before it goes down the brook. Well, if you look at that one and then you go up on one off of, I don't know, it was an older one that we redid.
So the
Charles River Drive.
Okay.
There's some up there. You won't even know they're there. They're completely forested out.
So the water retention ponds are overgrown.
Yes.
Okay.
And a lot of times what happens is, so if they get the roots in there and everything grows, they might get short-circuited, so they're not working like they're supposed to. Instead of going right through
Right,
instead
they
of holding.
get clogged and then they flood.
Yes.
There's flooding too that goes on there.
Yes. It happens, we get it comes up occasionally, it's interesting just because a lot of homeowners will call us about taking care of this, but we can't take care of it because they might not have been transferred over to the town, or they're part of a subdivision, like it's private property. So
Oh.
even though it ties eventually into our stormwater system, we can't maintain part of that because it's against the law. So that happens quite a bit. Implementation, I think I talked about this before. These are things we do in town: reduce roadway width, put in BMPs, rain gardens, tree wells, biotension areas, and then our residential rain garden program. We've been just doing this stuff right along. And I can't stress enough, we're not just doing this type of work for the MS4 permit. We're doing this type of work for Franklin drinking water. We're doing this to reduce overall costs when we construct a road. Okay, so it's just a multi-tiered type of thing. That's what we try to do here in Franklin.
Chair, if I might. So definitely hear your point about benefiting Franklin drinking water here at Brutus. I guess one statement and then a couple of questions. One thing I do want to point out for the citizens is that this is very tied in with the removal of sidewalks that we've heard concerns about. This is kind of ironic. Here we are, a green community, recently designated, working to become more walkable, more transit accessible, and because of this other eco policy, we're being forced to rip up sidewalks and reduce our walkability at the same time for some very, very, very modest gain in permeable surface, because that's just how the bureaucrats that designed this thing thought it up. One thing I will also ask about is with more of our water seeping back into the water table here in Franklin, what does that mean in terms of salt runoff? You can't break down salt very well, so the salt we put on the roads, is that going to be upping the sodium levels in our drinking water and potentially harming people that have heart conditions, or other pollutants, even phosphorus? Is that going to be ending up in our groundwater and potentially harming our drinking water supply by keeping it here versus having some of it flow out into the river and out to the ocean?
So, two different things. I get it. Just for our sidewalk removal program, it's a very difficult decision before we remove a sidewalk. I mean, it's not like we just go in there and get rid of a sidewalk. And we're not removing any major sidewalks. These are usually on cul-de-sacs, a 500, 600-foot cul-de-sac, and, we remove the sidewalks. Or, it could be a smaller subdivision. We still keep a sidewalk, we just get rid of two. Because we've just found out that most people that live in a cul-de-sac anyways, they walk down the road. They don't even use a sidewalk. Other ones that might be in another subdivision, they use a sidewalk, and then we try to bring up to the folks that live there that most of the people that are like speeding around a subdivision per se, they're not coming from Bellingham to do it. It's their neighbors. So they kind of get it and they self-police with that. So I will tell you, just touch on phosphorus real quick before I get into the salt issue. Phosphorus tends, even as a runoff, it gets fixed in the soil. So it becomes part of the soil. So it won't necessarily make it into the drinking water. It has to be extremely, extremely high level of phosphorus to get released. It has been shown, I think, a couple times, right, Gene?
Yeah, you can get there. Yeah.
But it's not the norm, put it that way. Salt is a whole other issue. I've been bringing this up to the council for 12 years. We use a lot of salt in this town. I run the water department too, and we test. And our salt level is high, and and that's something that flushes through the system. But we go out and we test the drinking water, at various sites throughout town, and it's called a secondary contaminant level, but we're exceeding some of the limits on it because of the amount of salt. The conundrum of that is, okay, if I stop using salt, as I brought up to the council, then people can't drive all the time. So then we get beat up on that. So it's a balancing act. What we have done in the public works that I can show is that when I first got here, we used to, if it was a salting event, we salted the whole town. We did every road, every subdivision. Now, for the most part, we have what we call our 5-truck route, I think I explained to you, that we do basically the mains, the hills, and the high priority. We work with the school and police department on, which we've reduced the amount of salt that goes out per application. But I will tell you, we use a lot of salt. And I can't give the answer to that. People slow down, they don't drive when it's snowy out. But I think you all know, what are the calls you get about all the time? It's either trash, something, I guarantee you that, or it's icy road conditions. I can't drive around. So that's what we have to deal with. I mean, our expectations, like I put out there, pretty much right now, is that you can drive in any snowstorm in your vehicle, and within 4 hours after the snow event, there should be some black on the road. I'm not saying curb to curb, but there should be some black. That's where that's where we keep it. The only way we can do that now is with salt or salt products. We're looking at other technologies. We're doing calibrations. We've got, weather stations in town because some parts of town will freeze before others. 32 is a very important temperature to us. 33 is cool. 31's not good. So, but we're doing things like that. But yeah, salt is a big problem.
And so that may be an issue going forward of then potentially having to remediate our groundwater, add extra filtering, distill it, or something like that if we end up with very high salt levels. I mean, I'm sure it's mostly at pretty background levels, but not if you're somebody that has issues with sodium. People that have kidney issues or heart issues and things like that, people could be very, very harmed by that, by exceeding those limits.
I have hypertension. I drink a lot of Franklin water. Might not be from the water, though. It could be other things.
Could be all these questions.
Are you done?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Jamie?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just really quickly on the sidewalk removal program, just so there's no mistake for the record, the primary reason we do the sidewalk removal is to save money to do other road work in other neighborhoods. Brutus has mentioned this a couple times. That is unquestionably the primary reason and the motive behind of it. We've gone through this before. When you take a road from 36 feet, an additional few feet for a sidewalk, and you shrink that down. When you look at Lincoln Street, which I think is at 24 feet, Brutus, I think is at 26, and then you get into a subdivision 4 roads deep that's at 36 or 38 feet, you feel like you're in San Francisco, and you wonder to yourself, that's plowing, that's maintaining, that's chip sealing, that's staff, that's benefits, that's health insurance, that's pension, that's sidewalk plows, that's infrastructure, that's capital money. You go through the numbers, which we have plenty of metrics on, that show when you reduce that back to 10 feet, that's a tremendous amount of money that you're saving, in essence of hundreds of thousands of dollars, which allow us to then go do Marvin Ave or go do Sherman Ave or go do another road in town. That is unquestionably, unilaterally, the primary reason why we do the sidewalk removal thing in town. As Jeff, my predecessor, as myself, Brutus, and others have mentioned, when you get into these stormwater issues, it's a secondary or ancillary benefit that does remove the impervious surface and does allow that groundwater recharge to occur. And so those other benefits that are there come from this, but make no mistake, the primary reason that we do that program is to try to save money to reinvest those dollars. It's just a general good business practice. Thank you.
Thank you, Jamie. And also, we reduce the size of the road. We have less salt used.
That's true.
Right?
Yeah, that's right.
Right. Okay, we have someone at the microphone now. And
I'm Linda Noel. I live down on Lincoln Street. Matter of fact, I live at the bottom of Lincoln Street, so I get all the runoff from everywhere. I have 2 questions. Have we ever considered using a sand mix instead of salt? I grew up in Colorado, and we didn't salt. We always sanded. Is it not economically feasible?
Correct. So most communities, even when I started here, they were still using sand with the mix. The problem with sand, it goes back to what the TSS. So all the stuff that we're trying to, we put that sand out there, it actually catches all the pollutants, goes in the catch basin, or it's run off into the streams. So you can buy sand, say argumentally, for $5 a ton. It costs me $90 to get rid of it. That's after I take it out of all the catch basins we have to do. It's very, very expensive. And they actually ship it to Vermont. Yeah. Massachusetts won't take it, but it goes to Vermont, believe it or not.
are you okay? Okay.
Yep.
All right.
Brutus?
Okay.
Brutus.
Next.
So these are looking at our major expenditures. Just these are estimates what we're doing right now. We're going along. Our storm sewer and culvert maintenance program stuff's budgeted, right, give or take $90,000. Catch basins and inlet cleaning, we're at $110,000. We have we're doing 1,800 catch basins a year. Street sweeping we were just talking about. We do all the streets once a year, downtown, twice annually. Inspections that we got to do of the different BMPs and stormwater controls, stormwater design and development, permitting assistance, just helping us because we're not always all the expert on this. MS4 permit compliance requirements. This is the different plans, public education that we have to do that's already budgeted right now. Capital improvement projects, different funds that come up, and then obviously equipment that we have to purchase. These are, I can go through all these if you really want, but these are basically, you can see right now, I guess the bottom line here is like our operating budget that you're going to get, or you've already gotten the final one for next year.
We had a discussion this
Yeah.
week, but we'll go to the FinCom in April and then the council in May.
Give or take.
You can just give us the, the
So
functional
program
areas, maybe.
administration, that's obviously budget, staff, grants. We do a lot of this coordination. We already spent $135,000. Regulatory compliance, what we have to do, and this that specialized stuff like doing the dry well or dry event testing of the outfalls and stuff like that. We can't do that in house. Drainage engineering and stormwater planning, that plays for different salaries, part of Kate, different stuff we do. Operations, maintenance, this is all the stuff that we actually out there, hands-on, cleaning, mowing, sweeping, it's $500,000. And capital improvements as they come up, it's what we do. So even in our operating budget right now, inside the budget, we're spending $1.1 million.
Towards the maintenance of the MS4 permit.
Sturman, that's part of our operating budget right now.
Right now.
Not part of the utility.
Right.
Or proposed utility. This is where this money comes. You guys are already, these are the same funds that compete with police, fire, library, and everybody else.
Right,
So
right.
this is what we're doing right now.
Okay. Jamie?
Just really quickly add on a couple points. This is why those organizations and a lot of the other cities and towns saw Franklin as the lead plaintiff in that lawsuit. If you chose the town or city that's doing nothing, you just look like, oh, you're trying to prevent from doing everything and you're just fighting the fight just to prevent it, despite however you want to assess whatever the federal government's perception is on it. But additionally, like we've said at many meetings, it's like the OPEB problem that we have with this huge liability. When that was introduced, many of us are skeptical of the shell game of money with OPEB. But the reality is it's there. And this is actually, unbeknownst, I think, to a lot of people in town, the town of Franklin has been working for far longer than a decade, even 15 years, inching along and progressively trying to implement and do these things to protect our drinking water supply. But now that the permit is actually official, it's here, it's the rule of law per se, it is worth highlighting that the town of Franklin has been a leader on these issues and has been slowly and progressively trying to implement through its operating budget some of these things, because we know that residents do like this stuff. It is good for drinking water supply, street sweeping, leaf cleanup, and variety of other things. And this was one of the reasons why the town of Franklin was chosen to be the lead plaintiff. So it's because we have been a leader on these issues. And this slide actually reinforces that. And so I just wanted to make that comment really quick. Thank you.
Thank you.
You guys added one more thing. With that, we haven't done anything more than the permit requires. It's not like we're going way above and beyond. I mean, we're meeting the minimum criteria as a permit as we went along. And that's what these funds show. The only time I might do something like a rain guard drainage improvement, because that was good for us. You follow me? When we were redoing the road, it made sense at the time. It was cost effective. We looked at it that way. But as far as permit requirements, I don't want people to think that, we're street sweeping twice as much as we need to. No, we're just doing the minimums to meet the permit requirements.
Okay.
So stormwater services currently funded, we just talked about the general fund. Residential properties account for 80% of the tax base in town, but residential properties are less burden on the stormwater system. So residential properties only have about 45% of the impervious area in town, and that would be your driveways, your rooftops, and patios. Commercial industrial properties such as the retail business and colleges, they have 55%, and this is non-road stuff. So what they try to show here is that basically the taxes, 80% come from residential in town, okay? So you look at the residential properties are somewhat, just based on the impervious area, they're somewhat supplementing the cost of the maintenance of
The larger commercial areas.
Yes, that have the larger properties.
Right.
So that's why this system is considered for, the town and it's just an option, the way to pay for it.
Right.
Projected future costs, this is the
So,
average.
Does anybody else have a question about what we just went through? No? Okay, all right. On we go.
Let's keep going.
Right.
Yeah. So these are just what's going to our five-year average, which will be next year through 2014. The program administration, regulatory compliance, you can obviously see going up. Engineering is going up. Operations and maintenance is going way up. And capital project equipment is going up. So basically in the operating budget, right now, we're at 1.1, we're looking at close to $2 million on average. And that's for the Fund the Roads program, drainage improvements, drinking water protection, street sweeping, and curbside leaf pickup.
Councilor Earls?
To the chair, if I might, I just want to point out for all citizens in the audience or watching this at home, going back to these numbers here, that regulatory compliance and enforcement number, that's the cost of preparing the absolutely enormous report, which, is that annually that we're required to submit that? You really got to see this thing.
It's me and Kate's favorite week. We have to sit down and go through this thing.
Did you bring one with you? Okay.
You said you were bringing it to do the showcase for
I
us.
did bring it the last time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But we have to go through every line in there and check off every line. And I have, it frustrates me, and you've heard this say this many times. How many times is someone take any of that information, analyze it, and came back to any community? I don't know, EPA's never done anything with it. We send off all these permits. If you don't send it in, they'll definitely come after you, but I don't think anybody's ever looked at them, have they?
I'd be surprised.
Yeah. But we have, but to your point, we're spending, just the town of Franklin, we're spending $150,000 a year to, meet all these things, but we never get any feedback on it. Like I said, all these things that we're doing great. Is the river getting better? Is this down? I don't know. That was one of my big complaints after the first MS4 round. Okay, what have we done all this stuff after 8 years? Show me what's something good. Give me something I can sell, I can tell people, but there's no tangible thing to do on it. So.
Is that part of the lawsuit?
No.
That there's no
Because if you talk to
feedback.
EPA, they'll say they're understaffed, it's not an issue, and whatever.
Okay.
Money's not their problem.
It's true. Continue, sorry.
Sort of just briefly expounding on that theme for a second. I think that, these kind of things, this question of the MS4 permit, is a great case study of how these kind of big regulations come down to us. This is like the grown-up version of civics class. We all learned, there's the Supreme Court and the presidency and Congress and all that kind of stuff when we were kids or teenagers. But, for us as voters, for us as citizens of this town and of this country, this is a really interesting glimpse of how regulations take shape. Often there's a great kernel of an idea. I mean, who doesn't want cleaner water? I'm sure the fish are thrilled. But these things go through so many rounds where people with an agenda rip them apart and keep adding guardrails to them until you end up with this nonsense left at the other end of it, where it doesn't accomplish its original purpose and is basically a concession to all kinds of people who are moneyed and organized that come to the table with this stuff. I mean, when we looked at that map many slides back, I think it's fascinating to see, where these MS4 permits are in place. Notice it's all urban areas. And, farmers in the U.S. get hit with all kinds of nonsensical regulations. President Obama even joked about this in one of the State of the Unions, probably back in 2014 or 2015, about the spilt milk as a hazardous waste spill. It was one of the EPA rulings at that point in time, or dust regulations, things like that. All kinds of things hit our farmers, out in the Midwest and here in Massachusetts all the time with crazy federal regs. But the interesting one is fertilizer. We're very, very allowing of fertilizer here in the U.S. because we have large-scale industrial agriculture that lobbies by crop instead of by region, unlike Europe. So instead of having the Bulgarian Farmers Association, we have the corn growers, the soy growers, the whoever growers, and they have substantial moneyed interests to go and take on these kind of permits. So I think it's interesting. There are dead zones. There are areas where there is substantial phosphorus and nitrogen pollution in the water. The mouth of the Mississippi River is a bad place to be a fish. Even the mouth of the Hudson River is a bad place to be a fish. But we're not asking them to change their fertilizer use because that's not that doesn't sell politically. So one thing Democrats and Republicans all agree on, they leave the farmers alone when it comes to Iowa season, So they're not going to propose putting restrictions on how farmers use phosphorus and nitrogen, and instead they're going to have us folks in the more urban and suburban areas in the Northeast or in California pick up the tab and essentially try to budge these dead zones, which are really the responsibility of commercial agriculture at Nebraska, and the enormous amount of phosphorus-based fertilizer that they're using. So just kind of wanted to make that point to folks here. I find it interesting how these things take shape.
It's so agriculture is exempt from the Clean Air Act and Clean Water Act, and you're exactly right. And part of what we have to do is we have to pick up the pace for what they don't do. So we have to do more. And I think as Mr. Celli said, like the plant actually has to produce water that's better in the Charles because we have to make up for the stuff that's not getting done.
Right.
Because it could be the agricultural. So that is the burden that goes upon the towns.
And I would even briefly add that, this is probably a handful of players, most of whom are publicly traded, that own most of the farmland and stuff like that. The ConAgras or those kind of larger major landowners that, probably some of the biggest purchasers and users of nitrogen and phosphorus fertilizer that is actually causing these riverine and ocean dead zones and stuff like that. But, again, they bring substantial number of attorneys and funds to bear. So it's us the citizens in the more urban areas that have to pick up the tab, as well as, frankly, small scale farmers. Here in Massachusetts, that the few people that might occasionally need to use some of these kind of fertilizers that get hit by all these kind of regulations. So.
Yep.
Question here?
No question?
You addressed my issue.
Okay. Okay.
Okay, so now we get into the funding options, taxes versus utility free. And once again, this is just a choice. Property taxes based on assessment value of the property. Tax exempt properties do not pay property tax. No relationship to the impact on the property to the amount of stormwater generated by the development on site. No opportunity to provide credits for on-site stormwater management. Revenue can be support by any town need. Then we have the stormwater utility fee. This fee is proportional to the estimated stormwater generated from the property as measured by impervious area. All properties, including a tax exempt, pay their share of the fee. Allows for credits to be granted for on-site controls, operates and as an enterprise fund, and revenues dedicated to stormwater management only. So the bottom line is, I think, is folks know that water or money that I collect for water, sewer, or trash, they have to stay in all those areas. Like, we can't use water funds to get a new police car. We can't use sewer funds to help out in the library. So they have to stay there. So that's the gist behind this. If we collect the stormwater fee, it stays in stormwater, and that's the choice.
Right. And it's a more equitable way to pay for it.
Correct.
'Cause-
And that's why these fees, these utilities have become popular. That's why a lot of communities are doing them. So the rate structure, this is, a lot of this stuff, this could be a whole thing on this, how we come up with a rate structure, but basically, we use a metric to determine, share the cost. We have, basically, you got an estimate right now, I need $1.8 million. So how do we break that up fairly and equitably across the users?
So you want to eventually have $1.8 million in this fund?
Correct.
Okay.
Operating fund.
Right.
So what's been tried, true, and tested, and Gene's pretty much the expert on this, and not just here in Massachusetts, but throughout the country, right? I mean, it's been around for a long time. So the billing structure is a flat billing rate based on 1,000 square feet of impervious area. So what they do, and what we've already done in town, is we looked at every piece of property. We've, through technology, have looked at the size of the roof, the size of the driveway. We come up, they have 4,000 impervious areas, so they pay a rate of 4 or 3 or 2 or 88, whatever it might come up as.
We have a question. Do you have a question?
Myself?
Yeah.
Oh.
You want to come up? I saw your hand going. I don't know if you
No,
were.
I'm just running things through my own.
Okay.
I'm sorry. Just go back just a little bit. What are the folks in the middle of the country, on the Mississippi, on the Colorado, the folks that might be impacted by what Eamon speaks to, all the phosphorus
Right.
from the growers in this country? How does this affect? I mean, I know I'm going back, and I know it's not the same, but it seems like they're the biggest offenders. To speak to your point, where do they stand in this? The Louisianas, the people that have all this coming down their way, the phosphorus, is it affecting the Floridas and in the Louisianas and those places? What are they doing about phosphorus and the things of which you speak? Thank you.
Yeah, that's a
Thank
great
you.
question. I think pretty much everybody's in the same boat, that the MS4 permits are everywhere, urbanized area. So whether you're in Detroit or whether you're in a small town in Florida, you're going to have a permit that looks something like the one in Massachusetts. And the TMDLs, the water quality limits they're putting on those rivers and water supplies on the Great Lakes, they're out there as well. So we talk about the Charles River because we know it well, the Merrimack River here, the Connecticut does have some TMDLs. Almost most water bodies have something that we're trying to control, and that's usually related to sediment because sediment controls phosphorus and other things. If you go to I guess I'll talk about Florida and in particular, they probably have more stormwater utilities in Florida because this is a real difficult problem for them for similar reasons. The water quality there is not good. They need to find a way to pay for their permits, and their drinking water is often usually related to the groundwater, so not too different. Montgomery County, Maryland, probably has one of the strictest permits you've ever seen in your life. And a lot of it, to your point, is about agriculture. And so how do you try to bring them to the process and make sure that you're also treating the flow from ag and not put it all on the urbanized areas? So there's a lot of conversation about the Chesapeake Bay, sorry. So their permit is probably even more restrictive than what we're seeing, but they're pushing back. There's lots of lawsuits going on in the Mid-Atlantic. And so, you have to look at town by town, but everybody's having this conversation. I mean, I go to 40 different communities a year. Fort Worth, Texas, just put $44 million a year for their stormwater program because they designed a city that flooded all the time. So they're going back and redesigning their city to deal with these kind of issues. Yes?
Houston. To the chair, if I might. I was actually looking at that map, and I think it's interesting because there do appear to be some agricultural areas that are in between major metro areas, like you mentioned, parts of southern Pennsylvania, Maryland, the stuff around Okefenokee and all that stuff in northern Florida, or around Lake Okeechobee in the greater Miami area. Those areas seem like they would be covered by those MS4 permits, but say that you're having a phosphorus party 50 miles east of Council Bluffs, Iowa, you wouldn't be covered. So in fact, it would be the residents of New Orleans, Kansas City, and many
downstream.
of the urban areas out in the Midwest or along the great tributaries of our country that would be picking up the tab, even though it may be you with your phosphorus party on your cute farm in Iowa, that's actually causing the dead zone out of the mouth of the Mississippi River when all that phosphorus and nitrogen actually reaches there. Harming all the shrimp fishing and all that stuff that goes on in that part of the world. So I was noticing that on the map.
Yeah, just for information. So the TMDLs that are being developed by EPA and regulatory agencies on all these rivers do have an ag component to them, but they don't have a good way to enforce that. So the reason you're seeing a lot of those small towns not really doing a lot if they're mostly agricultural is because we have an MS4 permit, a way to enforce us complying with the TMDLs that they don't have on those ag properties. There's a lot of lawsuits pending around that issue, but right now it's almost voluntary what the agricultural community does as far as controlling things like phosphorus and nitrogen. So, good points.
So once again, so US Ag basically can thumb their nose at this and tie it up in court because they can afford to tie it up in court a long time. We may run out of money here because the coalition ran out of money that backed us up, but US Ag has this much money, you'll never run them out of money.
They're pretty well organized.
Or for that matter, will they be fined at the rate, at a higher rate, obviously, as they're the bigger polluter, as they're the bigger offender? Or is this equal throughout the country? In other words, how do we get the richest to pay their fair share and not push it on to some of us not so?
If I knew the answer to that, I'd probably run for president. But I think, our country is so different. So it just quickly, Region 1, which is New England, has a whole different set of circumstances and things we're trying to deal with because we're so urbanized. Just New England is just chock full, as you say. And the same thing if you go down to the Mid-Atlantic. It's a very different permit if you go to Arizona, because their issues are different, right? And there's no one solution, but I think New England thinks very similar to the Mid-Atlantic, and I think we're addressing these things and learning lessons from what's going on in the Montgomery counties of Washington, D.C. that we can use here. And so how do we deal with phosphorus? We kind of know how to do it. We just know it costs a lot of money. So we're still looking for ways to save on that by doing it, though it sounds like we'll go back to the leaf pickup. That doesn't sound like the most environmentally sensitive things to do, but it'll probably get the best bang for your dollars by starting to do that when the final phosphorus numbers get counted. That's going to help you maybe pick up another 10%. So it's unique.
Jamie?
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is an extremely fun and interesting conversation in the big picture. But to answer part of that question, if we have activists and bureaucrats for CRWA here, remember, on the flip side, that's what's going on out in the Midwest.
Yep. Sure.
Right? So we have lobbyists and activists on the flip side that try to protect the polluters, if you will, to do that. and be damned what goes on downstream, I think was what Councilor Earls is bringing up, and many other folks. And I think that what you have here is a different set of regional values comprehensively in New England, because we're denser, because we're smaller, because people live closer together. You know, folks have to also remember, in New England, I think Mr. Celli brought up Arizona earlier. You know, not just in the current day, but 20 years from now, look at what is going on out from Colorado west in terms of diversion of just water quantity, let alone water quality.
Right.
You know, we get in Massachusetts, we put a water conservation, the state puts on us a one-day water conservation program known as a water ban, and we can't water our lawns, and, you know, people have a hard time with that. You're looking at states west of the Mississippi that can barely even afford water to come out of their faucet at all. And so we're dealing with apples and oranges here. And I think that for every activist organization we have for the Charles River Watershed Association or any other pro-environmental group in Massachusetts, we have to recall that the flip side is happening out in other parts of the country. The city of Houston, why it floods so much, they don't even have zoning. And talk about suburban sprawl. The city of Houston just goes forever. If you've ever been to Houston or driven around southern Texas, you could just go around forever, and there's no zoning, there's no regulations, and there's no problems. There's significant problems in Houston relative to flooding. So, you know, we are debating apples and oranges. As much as this is a really fun conversation and really interesting, we have to also recall that on the flip side, there are people in organizations on behalf of those farming organizations, because I think, to Councilor Rose's point, you know, if you're a farmer out in the Midwest in Nebraska, the educational opportunities necessarily aren't there for everybody to try to rise up in America's economy. The cost of doing business probably far exceeds, in a lot of cases, what the revenue is that you may be able to be brought in, hence why you have a lot of corporate agricultural interests buying up a lot of those farms. And those lobbyists and those activists are going right to Washington, D.C., to fight for their half of polluting the Mississippi River, just like the opposite interests are in New England to try to go fight at D.C. to try to clean up and make sure our water quality here in New England is sustainable and pure for future generations. So it's an interesting discussion, and you know, it is 9:30, and you know, obviously we have about another half hour, but we could probably debate this for, you know, all afternoon. It's pretty fun.
I think it's interesting that we all agree it's not very fair, but it's there. Right? And so what we need to decide is how are we going to deal with it. Right? But it is a very interesting discussion.
Super fun.
And we have about 20 minutes left, I think. So, but we have a question.
Yeah.
Yep.
I know we have to cover a lot of ground, so I'll try to be brief. A really quick question related to that. I know we want to terminate that discussion.
Okay.
Have the plaintiff groups, has anybody approached our big congressional delegation and said, you know, WTF, can this be adjusted at all? I've wondered about that. And then I'll just zip through a couple quick things. Selfish question. I have a driveway that's a disaster. I'm thinking about repaving it. If I just rip it up and put gravel in, does that give me a credit? Because it becomes a pervious surface, I presume?
So gravel or stone is an interesting one that always comes up.
Mud.
Huh?
Go that far.
So
Everybody get ready.
Don't do it.
it's more of a policy thing, which could be determined in town. But according to DEP, they will say a gravel or stone driveway is impervious. Doesn't count.
Okay.
So the compaction. But that's something that we could look at town as far as credits go. I mean, that's something we can do locally.
Yeah, because there are some, there are actual formal paving stone systems that are called pervious.
Yep.
That would probably be.
It has a base underneath the
That's a good
stone, yep.
choice. Yep.
And then, real quickly, with our Charles River Pollution Control District, that's a regional system. Are we considering, is there any option to have a regional approach to this? Would that have any benefit with other communities involved? And last but not least, I know Brutus has talked to the council before about the probable need for a huge new interceptor project. When we're doing that, could we just reroute all the water to Blackstone or something while we're at it? Start with a clean slate? I think I'll leave the beavers out of this question.
So,
Thank you.
so as far as regional goes, we've really looked to other communities about trying to do things together and, but that's, our town, we're part of a, coalition. We actually with Newton and some other towns just trying to do different things that can save money. And that's more like on the like I call the low hanging fruit, like the fertilizer, stuff like that. When you start getting into the nitty gritty of it, I don't know. I haven't run the numbers. Does it make sense for us to share a street sweeper with Medway? I don't know. I don't know if those costs run. What would make sense, though, is if we had a consortium together, like how we buy salt. A
Right.
bunch of communities buy them together. We could go out for a bid to clean catch basins. Maybe that's something that we could save money on. So, but a lot of that stuff we haven't really explored yet. But I think
It's difficult between towns to work out the agreements, so we haven't gone to that length yet, but it's something to look at as we go forward.
And it's interesting, we talk about how governments are run. Massachusetts, which we have, 341 little communities. When you go down south, usually the county runs it. So there might be, Maryland's only 6 counties. So one county runs this huge, massive program, opposed to us trying to get these little towns together. So it just makes, and believe it or not, there's a lot of laws and procurement in Massachusetts makes difficult even for towns to work together. I mean, just like it's like little sidebar things, but we finally did, a mutual aid thing that got passed by the legislature.
Right.
Because 15 years ago, if Medway really needed something and I wanted to send the Vector truck over to clean, well, where's the liability if one of our workers gets hurt over there? These are just big issues type stuff that what town owns that worker, something happens, or there's a car accident. But we now have mutual aid that, they can help us out, similar to police and fire. But these are just rules that are just in place that just take forever to change. So that was the regional thing. Let me get,
Okay, we have another.
oh,
Okay.
Quick question regarding the fee structure, and you're just getting into it. Is there could you go into the pros and cons of whether it's an enterprise assessment or whether it's a tax assessment? The
Sure.
advantage, disadvantage, pros and cons.
I think we have it on a future slide, right?
what's that? I think we got some.
You may be getting into it, so I may be
Yeah.
jumping in.
So basically what we came down to get through this slide, 'cause I know we got time, is we came up with the average based on 1,000 square feet. The average residential in Franklin is 3. So whatever fee we come up with would be based on a 3. And there's we also got 82 or
82,000.
82,000 billing units. So that's spread out everybody. So however we want to break it up with the fee, there's 82,000 of them.
So there's 82,000 billing units in the town.
Yes, potentially.
And the average per house is 3,
Residential, yeah.
residential house.
So this would show you based on our annual needs right now, going forward, or our average 5 years. So what we're looking at, our fee would be $28.15 per billing unit. So the average would be 3 times that, it was like $84 a year. Okay?
So that would be the average fee per household.
Yes.
Right. Could you hold on for a second, Brutus? We have another question.
Based on last Wednesday's council meeting when we had a budget presentation, is it safe to assume that if we adopt the stormwater fee, that presently the 1.2 million that is coming out of the general budget would be reduced and supplemented by this, correct? So now we're not at a $3.9 million deficit, we're minus 1.2 if we adopt this. Is that a correct assumption?
Were you on the town council at one point? That is exactly accurate. I just want to note, Mr. Celli is 100% correct. I just want to note that is not something that just immediately magically happens on one day.
Right.
Right.
This is going to
Phased
take,
in over
this is
time.
going to take, in our estimation, if this were to go into effect, say, January 1 of 2021, just hypothetically, it will take us, we believe, between 3 to 5 years to slowly take that operating budget liability that you saw earlier on that slide of the 1.14 million or whatever,
1.2.
and slowly work over and take that out of the operating budget as the money is collected, as the reserves are built up, and as we're able to move current operations over to that utility. We have to go through a hiring process. We'll have to hire a stormwater manager. I mean, it's a long process. So I just wanted to, you're 100% right, Mr. Celli.
Okay.
That is absolutely accurate. I just want to close it by saying that doesn't happen, on July 1st next year. It'll take a few
Thank you.
years to settle in.
You're welcome. Yep. Yeah, we have another question.
Hi, Renata Aguilar, I'm at 38 Palomino Drive. So just to kind of tie into this, I wanted to know, like, what would be the timeline basically for this, the permit, first of all, because you mentioned like different marks, like 10 years out, or, and something probably coming down the road now that we have to do the permit, but what's the 10 years, out, what's 20 years out, what's the timeline for that? And then what would be the timeline for the utility fee or the tax? When do we have to decide it? How are we gonna decide it? I know we have these meetings, but, what's the timeline for all this? Thank you.
So it's a 20-year permit. We're starting, next year we start, like, year 2?
No, we're in year 2 right
We're
now.
year 2.
All right, so it's a 5-year permit.
Well, but yeah, but.
So basically, the permit began last year, so we're in year 2 of a 5-year permit, okay? And that 5-year permit, though, gives you things you have to do for 20 years. So it says, here's your first 5 years, and here's very specific items. However, the phosphorus program, we expect that you're going to have that addressed over a 20-year period. So in 5 years, hopefully, last time we went 10 years between permits, you'll have another permit that will address the next 5 years. So that's the goal of EPA, but they seldom get it done that quickly. So 5-year permit, but with goals that are beyond that, so that you start working towards those goals. Does that answer? Okay.
And as far as implementation of the fee, that's up to the management and the council, and that would
Really quickly on that, I mean, the council did set up the utility, so folks will, by the end of this calendar year, likely see the utility put on your water, sewer, trash bill. There's a 0 there, but our thought is due to the complexity of this issue and the lack of engagement on this issue, which is why we're starting with these forums, was if you want to get people's attention, stick the 0 on the bill, and at least they now know there's something else coming on that quarterly bill. And that after these forums are over, we're going to do these few forums in March. We're going to work with the ad hoc committee to see what next steps. I think I've already taken a few notes. I think maybe we'll get Kate back down here to do some more rain garden tours throughout town, because we used to have some very popular rain garden tours, which were a lot of fun. And we're going to continue this discussion. I don't have a magical date. I think earnestly we wanted to really work harder to get people in the room. So I appreciate everybody spending their Friday morning coming in, and we're going to do a few more of these. And my educated guess tells me we'll probably continue to do a couple more. And to Brutus's point earlier, it's still in that Plato stage. I mean, we can work with the assumptions, like the impervious surface definition. We can work on the rate. We have a model here to start with. This is the beginning of the conversation, and we want to really work with the community and the business owners throughout town to try to model that to what will actually be digestible or phased in over time, like we've done with OPEB. And so now OPEB's, other post-employment benefits, we have a huge liability on that. Now we have a policy. It's well ingrained in the budget, and we're just cooking along to meet that liability, and we hope to see the same thing here. So we don't have a defined date, but I think to Gene's point, we don't have, a lot of years to just keep on kicking the can down the road before the EPA at some point is going to say, okay, what are you guys doing? And then all of a sudden you get what's called a consent order. Now you're legally bound to do something, and now we don't have a choice to mold it anymore. Whereas right now, I'd like to really work with this to try to meet the needs of the community and what people feel comfortable with, as opposed to having the EPA actually then really tell us to do this. And now you're in the position of feeling, I think, a more tense conversation now, because now you're really feeling like you have to do this. And so, I think by earnest, we have to have some sort of decision by the end of the calendar year, really one way or the other, what to do.
Right, I think it's important that's why we're having these information sessions, is to get people's input so we can develop it the way we want it before we're told what we have to do. Right, so, and that's why we're doing this. Okay.
So, yeah, rather quickly, this basically gives you a rough idea of what it costs, a 4 billing unit, 2 billing units. This is based on the 28. And then the one on the commercial property on the right, that's the big Y across the street. But looking at typical credit situations. Once again, it's policy, but they could easily document and show that they could get credit for half of that.
Because they have that all, that.
They have that whole
big
system in
collection
place to go
system.
through if they want to, they
Right.
want to petition the town.
Right.
And here's
There
the
it
credit,
is.
yep, the credit policy. That's, and once again, this can, because it is a fee, not a tax, you can do this. So you can give up, and once again, you can give up, you could give 10%, you give 100%, you give 50%. It's all policy in town that I think we'll discuss as we go forward.
Just go back to that really quickly, Bruce. That's the Big White parking lot underground right across the street. You know, we all go in to go grocery shopping, but, you know, those folks, because of that stormwater bylaw that was enacted in Franklin, you know, well over a decade ago, to go back to the beginning of this conversation, for a lot of businesses in town, they have done good work on this. For Dean College, for example, there are some properties where Dean College was here obviously well before the stormwater bylaw was in effect. But if you look at the campus center and some of the other recent development that they've had with, I think, the dorms, I think that they did meet the stormwater bylaw. So Dean College wound up paying, you know, a fair assessment on this. But to be fair to them, some of their properties have been captured by the recent stormwater bylaw, and many other properties haven't. So, you know, they're likely to see some form of credit. Not a holistic credit, but, you know, beneath the surface throughout Franklin, projects like the Big Y have been going on for well over almost pretty much 10 to 15 years now. And beneath the surface, there's some really cool stories about businesses that have done some really good work to protect our drinking water supply.
It's just an interesting thing when you look at those stormwater up there is that what the Big Y to do, it's tough because that's a land issue. They don't have a big land area on the property to put a big exposed, so you have to go underground. It's
Right.
expensive. So that's why, and then I can tell you it's high groundwater over there because we actually have a well out
Well
back.
over there, I know.
So that's why that system, you know, but you don't always have to see that. But take on a flip side, when you're looking at the Newtons, the Brooklines, they don't have land like we do. They have to put all this stuff in. So
Right.
it's a lot more expensive for them.
Okay, we have a question.
Steve?
More of a comment, thank you, before the question. Steve Sherlock, Franklin Matters, and 10 Lawrence Drive. I also recall, I believe, when the Four Corners building was replaced by the Walgreens, they also had a similar in-ground structure, and I've got photos of that. And when we did the expansion of the parking lot at the senior center, I believe you did that as well in the senior center parking lot. So while businesses have, the town has also been advanced to their point, as they've said. And as I continue to walk around, whether it's the tree wells or the rain gardens, they're all over the place. And once you start looking for them, they are all over the place. So 2 points. At some point, you'll probably have on the new stormwater page, which thank you for putting that together, a listing or for a citizen to come in to say, what is my count? So I could put in my 10 Lawrence Drive, find out what I'm actually going to be in terms of the building units. Obviously, things still need to get involved, but that'll be a good thing to do. So where am I? What is it going to be? And then to pick up on the conversation earlier, I also need to repave my driveway. And what would be the approved, you know, mitigation of whether it's drain water blocks as opposed to dirt, which may not work, although it may locally, but not from an EPA perspective. So thank you for your information, and I am looking forward to additional sessions like this.
That's good to know, be able to tell people what they can do as a homeowner, right? Yeah.
How's 8211 work for you guys? Before we give too many kudos to Big Y, what Brutus just said, we built, if you drive around the back of the Big Y, it's right up against the wetlands. There's a wall there, and it's swamp right behind it. There was a day we would have never, there would have been different regulation in place. Just to, not to speak to a different issue, we've managed to, in Franklin, just my own soapbox, to build on everything we possibly can and cover up everything with either cement or roofs. And the last question is, Dean, the beautiful project called Dean Avenue, did they do this? Did they have this? They're on Delcarts in our watershed. Did we make them do this?
Yes, they've met all the stormwater requirements.
Same
Like
as-
And I'll tell you, my soapbox.
Go ahead.
I actually got a grant from EPA to for the public to work on private property. So when I was talking about that flooding area that's always on Dean Avenue, right in the corner, we're able to integrate that into that property for them, and I got a 319 grant. And EPA was all excited about this because, gee, we can have a private-public workshop. Everybody worked together and went out. You know what we found out through that grant? It don't work. You know why? Because of regulations, how we pay, the costs associated with it. Because everything we do, we have to pay, the prevailing wage rates. They don't have to. The transfer of funds from the town to the public, it's been an absolute nightmare. It's literally, we came out of the grant, you don't want to do it until they change the laws. So we were the first one to try it, and we're writing the report up saying, don't do it. Because it's just too hard. Because at the end of the day, it was way too much effort for what you're getting the bang for the buck out of there. So, and you know what, that developer, they've been very cooperative, and they've been really
Good.
tried to help
That's good.
out, but it's just hard.
Yeah.
Because of the laws that we have in Massachusetts are very difficult. So we talked a lot about phosphorus till we're blue in the face, and obviously one of the things, you heard my jokes about it, but one of the big things is, leaf pickup, because leaves are a big problem. So one of the things that the town manager came up with, is to give him credit for this one, was, do a leaf pickup, because he gets a lot of calls politically. Milford does it. I can tell you Worcester does it. A lot of big communities do this. It's a public service type thing. And then Gene actually kind of hit it on the head. It's an expense. There's no doubt about it, but you get a lot of credit for it. So that's kind of the way we look at it. Doing this might be, you're going to get a long-range, bigger plan than, doing the underwater parking lot system here. We actually have some of those here, too, at the town hall that we're putting in before. But anyways, trying to recreate that. So I think politically, influentially, bang for your dollars.
Customer
to get
service.
Customer service. And I can tell you as a DPW director, it's just another pain for me. People are going to call up, you didn't pick my leaves up, you missed this street. I had them out there at 9 o'clock. I swear to God I did. That would never happen. But I blew them out there. I was out there last night till 8 o'clock in the morning, put them out there. You missed them. So I can just see it now. But
The wind.
I know.
The wind.
But so my question is, if it's the biggest bang for the buck for the credits, right? That's what
Yeah.
Gene said. So if we pick up the leaves in Franklin, what type of credit is that? Is that
Question.
there's even more time to reduce less phosphorus?
It's part of the whole. You want to
Calculation.
explain it? Yeah.
Yeah, the way they calculate what your removal rate for phosphorus is on how much impervious you have is one of the things.
Right.
And then they give you all these other activities, and street sweeping and leaf pickup
Okay.
all get a percentage. So we'd look at what percent of town you were collecting leaves of, and so instead of having to remove 26% of your phosphorus, it might get under 21%.
Okay.
So it could be,
All right.
until we figure out the actual number, but it'll be a couple of percentage points, which will save you from having to put something else in the ground.
Okay.
And we track how many leaves, how many tons or yards that
Yes.
they want to pick
Okay.
up.
Yep.
Instead of
All
just
right.
saying, we have a leaf program to the whole town, they'd actually want to see some numbers. That's what they're going to do.
We have a question.
Where do the leaves go? Because I've found
know.
a study online about the EPA and Bellingham, Washington, actually, I think it was, and they've had to ban all uses of all mulch, and I think get rid of all grass clippings because of phosphorus. So I would assume it has to go out of our municipality to somewhere else in order to actually get the credits.
So there's two ways that I would look at it.
Because it could leach right back into Beaver
it
Pond
would
where it is now.
No, it would, we would collect them, and it'd be the composting system, but it would have to be the facility that would collect the runoff where they would go.
Right.
So,
Right, they'd all be together. Before we get close to the end, I want to make sure we've answered this gentleman's question about the pros and cons of the fee versus tax, and I want to make sure that he's okay with what he's heard. Do you want to come back up? Are you okay?
Maybe I missed it.
Yeah.
I know and this is through some conversations with Jamie about different other projects, if you will. A tax you might be able to deduct from income for income tax purposes. However, if it's a tax, it goes into the general budget of the town, and the town can use it for whatever they want to use it for. Whereas if it's an enterprise account assessment, that's what I was looking
Right.
for. Okay?
Yeah.
It's going specifically for that purpose. So I just, maybe I answered my own question, but, just the advantages, disadvantages to both ways of doing things.
I would, and once again, I'm the DPW director. I'm not the chief financial officer for the town. Like,
Jamie
So,
can answer that,
Jamie is.
but I think
So really-
one of the things is that it's more equitable as an enterprise fee because you pay for how much impervious material you have, so that the industrial, commercial would have to pay more than the homeowner.
Yep.
Then Jamie can get into a few more details.
I mean, really, when you're talking about property taxes, you're talking about competition with schools, fire, police, DPW, library, senior center, recreation, right? And so right now, times are reasonably good, right? Because the economy is reasonably good and we've had stable revenues in town. We've got a great business culture here. Where Bruce put up before, you've got an 80% residential tax base versus 20% commercial. That's a very good percentage relative to a lot of other communities. But, you know, the competition for those dollars are fierce. And so, as you saw at the budget meeting, somebody mentioned it earlier, you know, on Wednesday night, you know, you see that competition. There was a room full of educators and teachers in here, you know, fighting hard for their slice of the pie. That's a good thing. We've been able to do what we've been able to do methodically over 10 to 12 years, you know, within the property tax burden. But I think sustainably with where we need to be for the permit, it's going to be very difficult to do that. And when push comes to shove in darker times, you know, the fear is that may slide away. In addition, it's not as fair. Because everybody pays the same tax rate based on their property taxes, whereas the utility, you're paying based on what you actually have. So the slide before where Brutus showed 2 billable units, one more, in the middle for a single family home of, you know, maybe a quarter or half acre lot, maybe a Cottage Street lot, cottage, you know, something like that. You're paying $28, you know, $30, $40. But EMC, who's got a 2-acre asphalt pavement field over there for a parking lot, is obviously going to be paying more, and so it's more fair and equitable there. In addition, it's more fair and equitable between like an EMC or a Stop and Shop or anyone else versus a Big Y. It's just happenstance of when they got here. It's just an innocent timing. But Big Y, you know, in this case, has been doing a lot of work, as well as many other subdivisions that have come in since then, as well as other businesses. And so there's a credit policy that will be able to be applied towards that work. So they're not being, basically penalized twice. Using the property tax, you know, as the option, there's very little ways for Big Y to get out from getting any credit for the work that they've done. Or to someone else's point earlier, or the town. You know, people forget, the schools are going to have to pay their fair share. The town, you know, we don't get out from underneath of this. No one else is exempt from this. And so it's a much more fair and equitable way. And if Brutus could go to the last slide of the presentation, because we have 5 minutes left.
That's right.
There is a list. Whoop, one more up, Bruce. The other way. Important, real quick. Fines.
Okay.
Well, fines, but the list was up there. This is why the trend among many municipalities, most notably around here, Bellingham and Millis recently, Bellingham just did their fee, I think a month or two ago, for the utility. That's why you're seeing a lot of communities go towards the utility rent, is because
20.
the Westfords and all of those folks are doing the utility feature. Because of that, you can see Chelmsford, Shrewsbury, communities we frequently compare ourselves to in terms of population, commercial, industrial, residential splits. Westford, Westfield, Newton, Bellingham's on there. They just did theirs in December or in the fall. This is clearly the trend that most municipalities are moving towards. In addition, because that money stays in that pot for that purpose, and I think that there's a citizen trust that comes from that. We know where our rate is going. We know where our fee is going. We know what we're getting for our money. But if it goes in the general pot, you know, let's be real. I mean, people tend to get a little skeptical. Oh, well, you know, that's more, yeah, you know, nobody questions where the trash and recycling fee goes because it goes into that pot to pay for that service. Same thing with the water money as well. So, you know, you can see that.
That's an important thing to go along with education information to the residents, that they know what the pro and con is and why, quote unquote, a decision is being made to put it in the enterprise fund rather than to make it as part of
The general fund.
tax. You know, that I think is real important to know.
We agree, Cliff. Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And then
There's
one more-
also,
Okay.
I was just going to Does anybody else have a question? We really need to wrap it up. Oh, Brutus wants to tell us what's going to happen if we don't.
So he can give you different statistics, but Swampscott, Mass, local and dear to us, is they were fined in 2015 $65,000 for not following the permit. All they weren't doing their outfall test. They just said, "Yeah, the hell with it." Well, they had to pay $65,000, and I said to Jamie, "That's a job, right?
Yeah.
Right.
You know, to do it." And
And also, they didn't have 10 years to pay that money.
no, they need to start doing
Right.
it right then.
Right.
Right then. Right
Write the
now.
check.
Everything they hadn't done, you better come up with a plan and get it done.
Right.
The consent order. And obviously, you've heard about, Boston Water and Sewer cleaning up stuff, but they've faced fines over the years, and $235,000. I mean, Gene was able to grab some of these for me. And then, Rhode Island, they were really slow in implementing.
Yeah, they did nothing.
They did nothing. And they finally were really forced to. And so besides having to do the millions and millions of dollars of work, they had to pay, a ticket.
Extra
basically
fine, yeah.
$350. So that's kind of where we're at.
Okay. So I'd like to thank everybody for coming today. And watching. There is a stormwater quick facts and takeaways. This is on the website. Is this up
It
on
will
the
be
website
today.
yet? It will be today.
We were leaving people a mystery to come to the meeting to get
Okay,
it.
well, but I think we've covered a lot of ground here, and I think we will continue the conversation on the March
11th,
11th
6 to 8.
from 6 to 8 at Franklin TV. Also, we will be doing a Facebook Live on the Franklin Town Facebook page right now to answer some of your other questions if you're out in the audience. And we will just continue to get these questions. We'll get you answers. Just stay involved and communicate with us and help us form this so that we protect everyone and we have what everyone needs to get this done. Okay? Oh,
Will there be any chance we can get it onto the Franklin TV site that runs?
it's on Franklin. It's on right now. Yeah.
So that it will run constant, as does a lot of things on 8 and 11,
Okay.
to the folks that are shut-ins, that can't get here, that can't,
Right.
are still as involved as any of us, or as concerned as any of us, but
Yes.
can't get here or can't be involved.
Yes, we are on. We are on right now.
No, but I
And-
mean, going forward.
Yes.
That pros and
Yes.
cons, like, for example, that gentleman spoke to, that was a perfect example of pros and cons that you might be able to get Pete to put, or you, Steve, to get, run a page that stays on, and people get to see over and over again to call it to their attention
Right.
that much the more.
Yeah, like an ad, yeah. Yep, great idea. We'll do that.
Nicely done.
Okay?
Thanks a lot.
All right, thanks, everybody.
Facebook Live.
Facebook Live.